Do the job you were hired for or have it ripped out from under you? This is a long one. So get ready. I've marked the key paragraphs with. You can also skip to the end for the summary. TLDR. If you don't have the time. Most people, including myself, have lived in an apartment at least one time or another in over the course of their lives and can attest to the nuances and annoyances that come from a poorly designed building. Thin walls, loud neighbors, circuit breakers tripping, poor air conditioning, lackluster lighting, abysmal parking, etc. I have personally experienced all of these. And in my college years I was also part of the problem. Loud parties, loud music, etc. We upset many of our neighbors. So, after getting the partying out of my system, putting my nose to the books, and graduating with a degree in electrical engineering, I found myself several years later working with a developer of multifamily housing. Hoping to right some wrongs from the past, I pledged to make the experience for the people who would be living in the community a bit better than my own. I couldn't control the building materials or aesthetics of the complex, but I did have control of the design of the electrical system, from the utility transformer to the outlet you plug your hairdryer into. I therefore set out to design a robust system with more circuits per apartment, better lighting, better materials, and better access than what was typical for the building construction at the time. My first step was to tackle the exterior lighting for the complex. Instead of using metal halides, those large shoebox lights that buzz at night, I persuaded the developer to install LED pole and building-mounted lights. These were designed to increase the light output of the parking area and walkways for safety, while maintaining cutoffs so it wouldn't intrude into someone's bedroom window. They looked good, saved energy, and had a higher color rendering index, 80, than the standard metal halides, 70. It took a while to get the calculations correct, but in the end, I was happy with it. Moving on to the apartment units. My design philosophy was such that no one, at any time, should be overloading any circuit within the apartment under normal use. No lights should dim when appliances, vacuums, for example, were plugged in. Every room had access to plugs on every wall. Every room should have a light, and every light should be controlled by a switch, and every switch should be within arm's length of any entry point into the room. I spent several weeks refining the project template, and after some back and forth with our client, the developer, some items were cut, but the majority remained as per the design intention, which was spelled out to the T. I was happy. They were happy. And after the drawings made their way through permitting, the developer hired the contractors, and the project was underway. Everything was going great until the general contractor hired the electrical subcontractor. For the purpose of this story, we shall call this electrical contractor Eddie. Not his real name. As a contractor, you sign a contract stating that you'll build what is shown on the drawings for a certain price. If the client accepts your offer, you win the contract. In doing so, you're obligated to provide what was shown on the drawings unless an addendum, revision, or substitute modifies the original contract, all of which must be approved by the engineer. It all started when I started receiving his submittals. For those not in the industry, this is a standard practice between the contractor and engineer, where the contractor will submit the materials he intends to use on the project to the engineer for approval. It is typical to see deviations from the design here and there, as contractors will typically source most the building materials from a select number of vendors, a single vendor being ideal. The vendors will provide alternates to the design, and it's up to the engineer to determine if these substitutes are acceptable or not. The first submittal was for the exterior lighting. which was complete garbage. Eddie submitted metal halide lighting, which was not only the wrong type of light, but the wrong distribution, which would cause backlighting into the residence's windows at night, the wrong color temperature, and the wrong output. Too dim. I rejected the submittal outright and told him to provide the light fixtures shown on the plans, which specifically indicated that no substitutions were allowed due to the calculations that were involved in the design. Photometrics. I gave him a call to explain this fact and told him to resubmit per the plans. Eddie wasn't happy. Not happy at all. However, Eddie does submit another fixture which was slightly better, but still not on par with the design. Again, I reject the submittal and state that unless he can prove that the fixture he submitted is similar to or superior than the photometrics shown on the drawings, it will not be accepted. It is not the engineer's responsibility to prove a substitute, and if he wants to use this fixture, he'll need to submit his own photometric calculations as well to prove the point. So, Eddie does this. The calculations look good. Really good. So good that I get suspicious and run his light fixture in my own model. And nothing matches at all. It's not even close. Which means he forged information on a contractual document. And now I had leverage for what happens next. The client calls and asks what is holding up the project. I call my boss and explain the situation. He agrees and backs my case to the client, which leaves Eddie with no choice but to provide the fixtures he agreed to when he signed the contract. This back and forth continues with several other submittals, which become shorter and show less information. I call Eddie to tell him he's missing items, and he responds with excuses and after some time ends up not returning calls or emails. Time passes and I move on to other projects. Then I get a call from our client that some of the buildings are ready for a walkthrough and he would like me to do a site visit to check the work before drywall is installed. We set a date and I'm off to check it out. I arrive and see the site lighting that started our feud. It's correct and looks good. And I feel optimistic, hoping he learned his lesson. That was until I entered the first of the apartment units. The first thing I notice is the wiring is white. This is typical for smaller gauge Romex wire, number 14, and our drawings show number 12 wire. 12 halves Romex, typically yellow, which was our office standard. I take a closer look and confirm this is the case. Now usually I don't take issue with this if it's brought to our attention ahead of time, and if it's used for lighting circuits only. 14 halves Romex is perfectly acceptable to use regardless. It's industry standard and code compliant. It just doesn't match our drawings and would require an unnecessary revision on our part to match what Eddie had his guys install to save himself from money without first discussing with us, me and my client. Then I look around at the circuiting, and I'm dumbfounded. Except for a few dedicated circuits, the drawings weren't followed at all. Lights and power circuits were combined, as were the rooms. As it stood, it would have been just another shitty apartment with the same problems I had spent so much time working to rectify in the first place. Again, we could have discussed this ahead of time, bounced ideas off each other and worked it out. I worked as an electrician to pay for college for years, so I know the nuances of wiring methods well, and enjoy troubleshooting problems with electricians. Except this was Eddie, and Eddie fucked up. Instead of working through the problem, he went off the radar and went rogue. Eddie was about to pay for his transgressions. ProRevenge. All, from this point onward, I wrote my report along with my pictures and copies of the plans. It looked like a murder scene with red lines, strike-throughs, captions, and comments which illustrated clearly and definitively the stark differences between what was designed and the dumpster fire that was installed. It was sent to our client and my best buddy Eddie. Which is standard. The client was pissed. We got on a call and Eddie got chewed out for his poor communication and decision to abandon the plans and do his own thing. However, Eddie did have something on his side, which was the electrical code. Even though the plans were completely ignored, he was still in compliance. And he made that point clear. Except, I had an ace up my sleeve. When I sent out the report, I didn't just send it to Eddie and the client. I also sent it to the AHJ, authority having jurisdiction, which in this case was the building official for the county. We'll call him Mark for the purpose of this story. Again, not his real name. Mark and I had gotten to know each other well over the course of the project. We discussed theory, code, restrictions, etc. to make sure that he knew what I was doing before the drawings were sent out for review. During our talks, he made it abundantly clear that whatever the drawing stated, as long as there weren't conflicts between the drawings and the code requirements, was exactly how the project should be built. Period. Looping back to the phone call between myself, the client, and Eddie, I suggested we add another person to the call, who was the project superintendent. We'll call him Steve. Steve and I had previously discussed Eddie's failure to follow the drawings while I was on site, and I had pointed out to him that Mark had said any deviations from the plans would mean that the project wouldn't pass inspection unless the drawings stated otherwise. I asked Steve about this on the call and he acknowledged the discussion and agreed with what had been said. Eddie, at this point, was fuming and said he had spoken to Mark as well and that this was not true. Really? I said. Is that a fact? Well, let's get him on the phone as well then. Shall we? Quote. So we called Mark. And thank everything that is holy, he answered. I filled him in on the discussion, my conversation with Steve, and he confirmed everything right there in front of the client, Eddie, and Steve. The drawings must be followed, and deviations would not be allowed. Period, or he would shut down the project. I was stoked. Finally, no one could hide and everything was out in the open. Sometime later, I got another call from the client, who had asked if 14 halves Romex was allowed to be used. I said yes it was, but my preference was that it only be used for lighting circuits and not power circuits. The client agreed and I updated my drawings accordingly. Now if Eddie had followed the plans, this change would have made him happy as it would reduce material cost in addition to being easier to work with. But no, Eddie didn't follow the plans. And that's how I made Eddie. Through the decision by our client, and the power wielded by the AHJ aka Mark. Tear out all the work he did over 2 months on 3 apartment buildings and start over from scratch. To his credit, he did finish the project to completion. Afterwards, he was blacklisted from working on another project again with our client and I never heard from him again. Moral of the story is, do the work you signed up for and if you have questions, it never hurts to ask. TLDR. Electrical engineer designs electrical system for client's apartment complex. Client hires shitty electrical contractor, who ignores the plans and screws himself when he's forced to rip out 2 months worth of work and start over. He probably bid low with the intention of saving costs on the design. Good for you though, by making apartment a better living experience. Need more people like you in the industry. I lived in an apartment building this year and can say from the experience, the wiring wasn't suitable. Went through 30 light bulbs in 6 months and it's only a 2-bed place. I wish that dodgy subby had his license to operate pulled. This kind of shit is so petty and stupid. Nobody wins with cheap crap like this. not the developer, not the contractor, and not the person who eventually has to put up with it. He's undercutting himself by doing it. If he had quoted how much it would actually cost, he would probably have been able to do good work and build that reputation and relationship with developers. Arg. I turned off a box fan running on low by the window, and my 3D printer plugged into the adjacent wall stopped mid-print. Just idled. We were dumbfounded. Similar issues with light and hairdryer. Vacuum can't be plugged in by the modem. Breaker labeled wrong, etc. Wish they had people like you make our apartment. Lol, can't wait to not be a college student anymore. Very satisfying to read how your project played out. Eddie's mistake is that code as minimum. Specs are king. As long as your specs meet or exceed code, that is what is done. Especially after y'all went round and round on the lighting, he should have known you were going to nail him. I ain't an electrician, but I did the work right after them and right before the drywall went up. Boy, have I seen some wiring disasters. And boy, is this a beautiful story from the perspective of a former insulation monkey. Great story. Thoroughly enjoyed it. My background as civil construction, engineering and management for contractors, tier 1s and clients. My only criticism to your post op is that it's not revenge. It's just your job. Granted that you did a good job. From the perspective of an electrician, thank you. I have always wished that the engineers would spend at least a little bit of time in the trade. On bigger projects, there always seems to be a significant issue to overcome that someone with actual trade experience would account for. You, sir, are a hero, and I would love to live in one of the buildings that you have put actual thought into, as opposed to the pre-1900 home that I do now. It's been rewired at least 3 times since about 1970. And I know that because each time they left all the outlets and just cut the wires in the basement. One of the 6 outlets in the bedroom was live. 2 circuits in the breaker box are labeled. And one says, kitchen wall W. Does W equals west? The world may never know. The other says, slant room. So, there's that. I figure that's the room with the really uneven floor. Ah. Amusing electrical stories. Heart. I just don't understand subbies that think they can change as drawn systems with some wackadoodle thing they dreamed up as it's cheaper but still to code. On projects like this, that's not your job. Just do your bloody job. Shop drawing review is critical. The contractor almost always submits a cheaper product than specified that, as he says, is even better. Ha. Where I live, none of this would have happened because we have a thing called a specification book. Contractors must adhere to. Awesome story. But if I may be so bold to offer a writing suggestion, the build-up is great. All the details really paint a picture about both the project and you, your motivations, etc. But the payoff is way too scant, I think, for people to feel the oof that it really held. I'd suggest doing an edit and filling in details about what that meant for his crew, pay, schedule, anything. But you already got my update. Man. All that reminds me of my time in construction inspection. Some contractors, subcontractors would go out of their way to try to find ways to penny pinch and end up spending triple after the material we told them wouldn't work ended up not working. I remember one site where they were putting in new water line where the sub kept trying to splice together cut-off pieces of pipe rather than just using a new full-length stick. He ended up sneaking one in on us because the moment they went to pressure test, there was a geyser in the yard. We ended up making them fully expose all the pipe again and found 2 other splice hack jobs and made them do it properly. After it was all said and done, it was also discovered that the sub had the audacity to double bill for all the pipe and fittings for the whole job, leading to them getting sued to Kingdom Come. I'm surprised Eddie ended up finishing the project. Where I'm from, it's standard practice to include a clause in the building contract that requires contractors to pay for a new contractor to come in and redo their work. In a situation like this, I've personally seen 3 subcontractors go bankrupt because they bid low to get the job and weren't able to get it done to the specifications. You are a good person. Thank you for your service. Very nice. Well written and quite juicy. Good stuff. Credit to you op to see this through with the contractor. I would have fired his after the light debacle without even thinking twice about it. It's not about building to code. It's about building to plan. If he will not read the plan or build to plan on day 1. He will not read plan on day 15. He needs to go. I worked for years in the building industry. You absolutely rock, smiley face.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Ericast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.